Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer with the podcast from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. When it comes to feel-good activities, nothing quite hits the spot like giving. We all want to give to one degree or another, even if we don't actually give anything. The feeling of knowing that one has truly helped out in some way, that one has breached the normal constraints of everyday selfishness, is one that cannot be duplicated by anything artificial or instantly gratifying. Giving generates personal satisfaction in a way that almost defies logic. It is a bit strange that giving has this universal feeling of goodness, being as its very nature is to provide something without getting anything in return. Little children don't possess this drive. Until a certain age, it is all about me. An infant only cares about what he or she wants at the moment. Children up to early adolescence tend to follow this pattern, though growing out of it is one of the truest signs of maturity. Selfishness remains a part of everyone, since this is the most natural drive in us all. Some people never really make it out of this condition, and everybody around them senses that something is a bit off with such a person. If somebody doesn't want to give even a little, they are, to some degree, not quite human. From an evolutionary perspective, it isn't so hard to understand this contradictory state of affairs. We are, after all, born as individuals whose single most important concern is staying alive. We have always been like this. It is built into our genetic roots and firmly incorporated into our bodies and minds. There's probably never been a time in human history when every single human being has not sensed this in their bones and at the core of their being. On the other hand, from our earliest emergence as the unique species known as Homo sapien, we have been living with others of our species, banding with them and depending on them as they depend on us. It is vanishingly rare for a person to exist on their own, isolated from everyone. When it does happen, it is almost invariably the result of some bizarre quirk of fate and not by choice. When it lasts for an extended period, it is worthy of a book or movie, since it is so out of the norm. This conflict between basic selfishness and selflessness stands at the very center of the human personality. It rides with us all of our lives, and we struggle with it every single day. To want only for oneself, to not care about the needs of others, is as natural as eating or taking a nice hot bath. But to not feel for others, to not want them to have what we want, to not give, is as foreign to our nature as abandoning one's own children. We want to give not only because the favor may be returned someday and it will boomerang on us if we don't. We want to do it because we know that it is good and right and it makes us worthy of the human race. This week's Parsha is called Vayakhel. That strange-looking word means he gathered, or something along those lines. It is an introductory phrase to a standard biblical line about Moshe getting all the Israelites around him to tell them what God has commanded them. As it turns out, this particular set of commandments have to do with the construction of the tabernacle. This Parsha is a bit strange for almost everyone, even old-time Parsha people. It seems to be almost a complete repetition of about 3 Parshas ago, with all the details of the tabernacle. The only difference, which isn't easy to recognize, is that earlier it was describing the plans, while here it is actually doing the work. It is all the same sections of the tabernacle described in almost the same way. A person who thought this was a repeat of that earlier parsha that somehow got copied over a little bit later would not be totally out of line. There are all the details about collecting the various materials, including the precious metals, the dyes, and the animal skins. There are various precious stones, oils, and spices. Following this is a list of things that will be made, including the beams, the stands, the cabinet, the curtains, the table, and the lamp. The altars are all there, as are the clothing of the priests, and even the nails used to hold everything together. It is hard to escape the feeling that we've read all this before. The only real addition seems to be the general feeling of enthusiasm for the project once it finally gets rolling. There is no question that a spirit of volunteerism infected the entire collection of people, despite the fact that they were out in the middle of the wilderness with little to nothing to speak of as far as wherewithal to actually make this whole thing happen. Anybody who had anything necessary for the tabernacle gave it, whether it was in the form of raw materials or in the form of skills needed to put everything together. The men did what was in their power to do, and the women handled what was expected of women. There were 2 divinely appointed artisans who seemed to be put in charge of the entire project. The leader was somebody called Bitzalel from the tribe of Yehuda, who possessed the required skills to make it all happen. His assistant was someone with the unlikely name of Ahaliav of the tribe of Dan. The text states that they, along with others who go nameless, were divinely given some sort of special talents in knowledge and understanding that would enable them to see the project to completion. The final result of all this preparation was success beyond anybody's expectations. The Torah states that, quote, all the wise people who would do the holy work came, with each person doing their particular skill. And they told Moshe that the people have brought more than is required for the work that God commanded to do. So Moshe commanded with a proclamation that passed through the camp saying, no man or woman should do any more work for the holy contributions. And the people ceased to bring things. The work that had been done was more than sufficient for all that was needed. It is not often that a project of this sort exceeds all expectations. This was entirely voluntary. Anybody who wished could have sat back and done nothing and watched everybody else do the work and the giving. Perhaps there were people who did exactly that, but the text gives no indication that anything of the sort actually happened. We are left with the impression that this was the collective work of the entire Israelite assembly, the men, the women, the skilled, the unskilled, and perhaps even the children. This was probably the pinnacle of cooperation and spirit of togetherness that was ever reached in the Bible. The rest of the story is spotted with disputes and rebellions, to say nothing of seemingly endless complaints about their situation. But none of that seemed to be present when this tabernacle was in the works. Somehow this project, this common goal of making a place for the presence of God on earth, managed to shove all that to the side in the face of a goal that was greater than any personal pain or suffering. And then in the middle of all this is a couple of verses that stand out a bit from all the rest. They describe the contributions of the community leaders, the princes, or Nisiim in Hebrew. The text states that these Nisiim brought the shoham stones and the filling stones for the high priest's apron and breastplate, and the fragrances and the lighting oil and the anointing oil and the incense spices. We don't know why these princes alone brought these particular ingredients. Presumably it was because they were extremely rare and could only be supplied by people of special status. The shoham stones were a particular type of gem used for the high priest's garments, as were the filling stones. The oils and spices were used in the ceremonies that were performed in the tabernacle. Apparently, it was left to these community leaders to supply these special items. There is an interesting early rabbinic take on these princes supplying these exclusive things. It says that they initially thought that they would let everyone else contribute whatever they could to the project, and that whatever was left over to be given, they would supply. When the contributions came in and they were found to be more than enough, these leaders realized that there was nothing left for them to contribute to the main structure of the tabernacle. Rather than be left out entirely from the whole project, they then decided to contribute these special things. There is a certain nuance in the Hebrew lettering of the word Nisiim, princes. A small letter is missing from the normal spelling of the word, which hints towards something lacking in their motivation. One of the main rabbinic commentaries in the Bible suggests that this lacking was a subtle form of laziness. They weren't eager enough to contribute, and they used the excuse of being willing to supply whatever hadn't been contributed already to justify not giving anything. It was only when they realized that they would be left out altogether that they understood their error. Giving requires initiative. It has to be pursued. It won't happen on its own like a force of nature. It is only when we proactively strive to give that we actually succeed in giving. Otherwise, like all things fall to their natural place on the earth when pulled by gravity, people will also fall to their natural place of only caring about themselves. Selfishness is the natural state of the person. It is where we all end up if we do not pursue the wonderful and enriching act of giving. According to this old rabbinic commentary, this is actually a form of laziness. It is allowing the human personality to sink to its natural level of selfishness and to do nothing. It is only when this tendency is resisted and the contradictory drive is chosen that we find ourselves the satisfaction and hidden joy of the giver. While this interpretation may seem unduly harsh on these princes, since in the end they did contribute something that nobody else gave, there is a certain justification for cutting them no slack. To give is one of the great gifts we have been given in life. It is a way to rise above the normal confines of life, where immediate survival and personal pleasure are the primary goals, into the stratosphere of the heavenly joy of selflessness. These are opposite poles in life, and both are essential. But if there's too much of the former and not enough of the latter, we find ourselves facing an empty existence, devoid of true meaning. It is only when we experience the divine gift of giving that we find our true selves. To give is to live. Shabbat Shalom.